translating the abstract ideas and notions of the Evidence Act, promoting transparency and access into concrete action. So we have put on, organized a couple of workshops here. Our goal was to get the community input on the usage statistics that were being developed in response to the Evidence Act. And these participants at our workshop had the opportunity to network with others. So it was a hands-on working in small groups. They provided feedback, used dashboards, Jupyter notebooks, and they had a lot of information they could access in terms of what this community does. And this is in the context of data we have at the Economic Research Service of USDA. So largely the Farm Survey in particular was one big focus. So, one of our biases was that we tend to always focus on users who are from the R1 universities, but there are a lot of others who we aren't reaching. And this is one of the sustaining collaboration challenges going forward. For those who take our work and they digest it, they put it out in a form their communities of interest and maybe extension outreach can use. State and local governments can have access to challenges that range from computing familiarity to software platforms and just plain enough time. So going forward, as we went through this process, we started to see how we need to be engaging more with minority serving institutions through these targeted workshops and dashboard updates. And that's something I wanted to emphasize going forward. Now, this project lowers the barriers and the cost of access, so we can get those users who we haven't been able to access very well, and maybe we haven't been looking for them very carefully, and have them be able to jump in and play. So this is when we see the DEIA agenda here. I'm talking about the I and the A part, being included in this network of users of a particular data product. This is what this workshop was able to identify. And then being able to access this network. So we're just not asking folks to watch the play on the field, but getting them on the field and getting the work done. So we need to be a lot more expansive in the pool of stakeholders we're looking to reach out to. This is one workshop we held last year. We have another one coming up in June that's titled Enhancing Data Discovery with Democratizing Data. A couple of our panel members are involved in this project, and ERS has been really happy to support this. And so this is a platform that aims to track data usage statistics for all data products produced by USDA. The researchers can access these statistics through the dashboard that they'll be presented. And the idea is to gather some feedback from these participants to assess the functionality of the dashboard and what are the potential future improvements. So this is where we're headed with trying to democratize the data, focusing on a number of concrete actions that we can move the needle here and move it forward. With that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Joe Parsons, the acting administrator of the National Agricultural Statistics Service.
Thanks, Spiro. Appreciate it. So my name is Joe Parsons. I serve as acting administrator at NAS, and each year we produce about 450 reports about all kinds of things about the agricultural situation, and we have a very wide and varied audience. And so, by the way, this talk really is an advertisement, by the way, for the podcast, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention my former colleague, Mr. Hubert Hamer, who's contributed to that podcast. And so anyway, I would just want to mention, our organization, we put out massive amounts of data, and we have to collect lots and lots of data, and we have to win the time and attention of millions of agricultural producers and agribusinesses every year. And so we have an evergreen problem, and that problem is, who's using our data and how are they using it? And then how do we communicate that back to those that provide the data? Because in many cases, those who provide the data aren't necessarily directly using it. They're often using it through some intermediary, through those who give them advice and stuff. And so I want to talk just a little bit about that. and tell you that regardless of what we do, we'll probably never have perfect knowledge of how our data is being used. It's a little easier to trap if there's digital exhaust for those use cases, but a little bit about some things that we've done. But first, we need for our own decision making, we have to rationalize resources within the organization. And so we do that in a number of ways. We certainly measure our customer satisfaction by going out to data users on a recurring basis using the American Customer Satisfaction Survey. And we also host, and ERS is a participant in this, a USDA data users meeting. And we do that twice a year. And in that case, we get a lot of what I would call power users who come and tell us about how they're using data, frustrations they might have, and other data series that they may want. And so that's very useful, but it's less than complete information. So like I said a minute ago, we have these data providers. And we often hear from our survey respondents, well, why should I do this? What's in it for me? How is this relevant, especially relevant on a local level? You say this informs policy, but what about in my state, in my local area? And so part of this project that we had was to, train a model to go out and search for and put in a dashboard, which if somebody can help me, I think I dropped it in the chat, but it needs to make it, I guess, to the Q&A for other folks.
I put it in the Q&A, Joe.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So that there is the dashboard that we have. We call it the 5 Ws. If you don't remember the link, you can always just say NAS and 5 Ws, and you should be able to pull it up. But it allows us to detail, at least for some of our data collections, specific use cases where folks have cited our data and used them, and give you some sense of what the use case was and its localized use. And so we worked on that. It was a great collaboration. And the other thing I would say about that is that we're going to talk a little bit about a different use case. My colleague Nick Pallotta is going to talk about a use case where there's agricultural extension, and that is folks who help train farmers and agribusiness folks on and to extend knowledge. They make specific use of our data in many ways, but it might not be cited formally in a paper. And so we've got some work that we did in that particular way. I will say, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, in that there are many, many use cases that don't necessarily generate that digital exhaust that will help us track what the use case is. So recently, and slightly unfortunately, we had to make a few modest program changes to our program of work. And in doing so, we informed the public, of course, and then those who advocate for the particular statistics and use cases, reached out to us. And even though I've been in the organization almost 38 years and think I have a pretty good idea of how our data gets used, I was still surprised and impressed by ways that our data was being used in ways that I did not know or expect that it was being used. So, our knowledge of our data providers has traditionally been sort of by this, like folks like me that have been around a long time. But this is also really valuable for us to have our younger staff, or maybe our staff with a little bit less experience, be able to gain and glean the knowledge of how data is being used, by being able to actually, if you will, scrape or sort of, process the information that lives out in the digital universe. And so we find that to be really valuable. I also should mention, and I think my colleague Nick will talk about this a little bit, we have an effort underway, and it's, I would say, underway, to try to use digital object identifiers a little more comprehensively in our publications so that we can better harvest this information in the future and do a little, maybe be able to make it a little bit easier for us. So anyway, I don't know, Spiro, I'm going to flip it back to you and see if you have any more comments, and then we'll go from there. Thanks.
I don't have anything else to add. I'll toss it to Julia. She had some questions she'd like us to elaborate on. I know we have a couple of moments.
Those were terrific comments. Thank you so very much. I will remind everyone that you can put questions in the Q&A and answer. Joe and Spiro can answer them as well. You have a question. Have you tried to quantify the overall impact of the data platform on the ag sector? From Kay Kim.
I will tell you, and I should probably there have been a number of papers sort of measuring the impact of information, within the agricultural sector. Most of that's been done at land-grant universities. And Spiro, I know that some additional been either former or current ERS folks have also done some work. Do you want to speak to that?
It's about the data platform itself. Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Spiro?
Well, our data platform is in its infancy right now. And so that's, purpose of these two workshops, the one we held last year and the one that's coming up, that I believe is probably on your program, is just to start to assess, what's the preferred design for the platform. And like Joe mentioned, we don't know everyone who's using our data. We have an idea who stakeholders are, but as we start to dig into this with some research on identifying who's actually accessing our data, we're constantly surprised. And I think Joe can speak to that too, as they had to cut back on a couple of surveys. He heard from people probably he never thought he'd hear from. And so that's one way to get a ping. But if we can find some tools here at our disposal, use them to figure out, okay, where are data being used? What kind of impact are they having? We're gonna be able to make a better assessment of its impact and its value.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much. Those were fantastic summaries from the people who are major data producers in the ag sector. So that's very helpful indeed. And I will put a plug in to go and listen to the podcast or take a look at the write-up in the Harvard Data Science Review. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.